It is, by far, the most challenging product I've worked on today on LaserNug. Seven different colors, several different layers. I'm going to break this into a 2-video series. In this first video today, I'm going to take you through more or less high overview from start to finish of how I created this sign. In the second video, I'm going to get into detail about a number of different things I've learned about the trace feature, Boolean and Weld, nodes, and several other different things or practices I learned out of doing this project. If you're a beginner or you're new to lasers like I am, or fairly new, I hope you'll enjoy today's video, and then I hope you'll come back for part 2, which will come out shortly after this one. Let's do it. So we're jumping into Lightburn. I've already traced out my logo, and we'll get into the details of the things I learned and the additional things you may need to know in part 2. I realized very quickly this is the most complex logo or design I've had to work with. 7 different colors, multiple layers, and I realized very quickly that I couldn't just start cutting out pieces. I needed to create a methodology or a process and take it step by step. So I decided the best thing to do was to start with the wood splitter letters and following that, the underlying layer that supports them. So that was our first step here. For those that may not know, I have a second YouTube channel. I've had it for a number of years. It's called GP Outdoors. And through that channel, I met Andrew Easton, who's the owner and the head of Eastonmade wood splitters right here in Ontario, Canada. And he, by far, in my opinion, makes the best wood splitters on the market. He asked me to make his logo. Little did I know that he had just done a rebrand. And that simple 2-color logo he used to have turned into this one. But I was up for the challenge. Because of its complexity, I decided it was best to keep the colored logo or the PNG file up on the screen or at the ready so I could continue to refer back to it as I was trying to determine where my layers are and what layers I had. As many of you know already, one of the design principles I use is I'll often make sure that I engrave the letters or the design into the underlying supporting layer as well as cut it so that I have an exact match when it comes time to put together the sign at the end. If you look closely at the wood splitter letters, you'll notice that the O's and the D have an inside layer. I didn't realize till the end of this project that when I traced this logo, I missed 2 very, very tiny inside layers on the trace. And you'll see them here resident on the P and the R in the word splitter. It's missing the inside. Needless to say, I'll cover that error in part 2 of this 2-part series. Since I've already cut out the letters wood splitters, I'm now creating the cut and the engrave on the underlying white layer of acrylic. I'm using my standard acrylic settings here, but when all I'm doing is engraving an underlying layer, I'm just trying to create a simple pocket. So I go into my settings and instead of 2 passes, I create 1 pass. I'm also going to make sure that my fill occurs first and then the cut occurs second. I've lined up my functions, fill first, line second. Everything looks good. I send it to the bolt. All right, back into Lightburn. My white acrylic layer is done. My wood splitter letters are done. And now I'm going to work on the Eastonmade letters. First thing I want to do is cut them. So I'm just going to bring this back up, take another look before I pick up my layers. Everything seems to look okay to me. So I've highlighted the letters themselves. As you can see, there are a lot of layers piled up in the middle there. I come down, I'm going to click it to my red layer, which is my cut layer. So I'm ready to send it to the bolt. A little tip that I've learned along the way, whatever material you're going to be cutting, before you remove it from the bolt, just tap it. You know, I happen to use my pick, but just tap each of the cutouts before you remove the sheet, because if you pull the sheet out and something didn't cut through properly, it's virtually impossible to put the sheet exactly back where it was to try to cut it a second time. So it's just a little handy thing I do before I remove the sheet, just in case. Now that my Easton-made letters are done, I'm just going to do the exact same process for the underlying blue layer. I'm going to try to sneak in there and grab the correct layer out of all of those layers underneath or around those letters. I'm going to try to grab what should be the blue acrylic layer. I'm going to change those to a cut layer, and then I'm going to go back into my current letters that you see as red, and I'm going to change those to a fill layer. And then I'm going to engrave and cut out the underlying blue layer that's going to support those silver letters. Same process. Just takes a little bit to get through, capture every one of those letters as well as the layer, make sure I've got the right tiny layer in behind them, group them, make sure I've got my fill and my cut layers correctly assigned, and then I send it to the bolt. So I won't keep taking you back into Lightburn to show you the same thing I've been doing over and over, but we're now on to the next part. I'm using the orange layer. Once that's cut out, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but with the gray layer that's going to sit underneath the orange layer of acrylic. Although I haven't shown you on each component, before I send the file to the bolt, I always click the playback function so I can see what's going to cut and what's going to engrave to make sure I've captured it correctly. And then finally, I'm going to create my base or the foundation to the sign, which is the black layer. So now with everything cut and engraved, it's time to check to make sure all of our pieces fit together and then to begin the build. I'm going to throw some 3M on the back of this sign, and then I'm going to take it in steps. First, I'm going to glue my letters to the underlying acrylic below them. Once I get all the letters cemented into their respective pockets or underlying acrylic, then I begin from the bottom up. I'm going to start to apply those first and second layers to the back plate or the black acrylic, which is the foundation of the sign. Then I'm going to apply that gray layer followed by the orange layer, and I'm going to finish up with the last words wood splitters at the bottom. I decided I was going to try something a little different. I like to pocket my letters, but you may have noticed that I did not engrave wood splitters on the back plate or the black acrylic. I thought since I had some outline there that I would eye it up, so to speak. And that didn't work out so well for me. And I'll explain why in the second part of this two-part video. And there you have the finished product. Given my limited experience and the complexity of this sign, overall I'm really happy with the outcome. It took me a long time to get it done, and unfortunately after it was finished I realized there was 4 big mistakes I made. However, it also forced me to get back into Lightburn tutorials, and I learned a number of things that I wish I had spent the time to learn earlier, but I know them now. Primarily, a number of things about the trace function in Lightburn, the Boolean or the weld function, the nodes, which were a little bit difficult and I didn't want to get into them, but I had to. I had no choice doing the sign. There's a number of other different things which I learned through mistakes by making the sign, which I'm going to share with you in part 2 of this 2-part series. I hope you'll stick around for it. Thank you so much for watching today. Andrew, thanks again for the challenge. There's always an adventure when you're involved. Have a great week with your families. Please be kind to one another, and I hope to see you on part 2. Cheers.